Testing. Yeah, that's
better.
Yeah, it's better.
Sure.
Yes.
Some of us do have personal interest in you, but we'll leave that for after the event.
Okay.
We're ready to go.
Okay.
Just let me know when you want.
Are we ready?
Yeah, I can start now.
Yeah, I'll start with a brief introduction of the event and why the panel looks like it does, and then I'll introduce our speaker before we begin.
Okay, I'll start.
Perfect. Hello, welcome to the Not UE Debating Society's EU election hustings for the candidates of the Southwest and
Hold it closer. Yeah, the
Okay,
front.
closer. Perfect. We're briefly going to explain.
You got to point it at the moment.
We'll briefly
Yeah,
explain.
see a difference there. All right, let's start from the beginning. Right, let's do it.
I'll
We'll restart the live stream.
Oh, never mind.
As well.
You go.
Okay, wait, let me just end then.
Always need one test.
Yeah.
Can you link me the group as well, the page, the new one?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'll send it to you.
We're live?
Yeah.
Okay, welcome to the Not UE Debating Society's EU election hustings for the Southwest and Gibraltar. My name is Darren Callipore and I'm the president of Not the UE Debating Society. We must make clear that we're not affiliated to the Students' Union at UE, the University of the West of England or UE Debating Society in any way. Today we were meant to have a fantastic panel of high-profile speakers from all parties that are standing in the seat. However, due to certain events, we have had certain candidates try and boycott the event, and then after the initial event was cancelled at our university, other speakers slowly started to pull out, leaving just one candidate who decided to continue on with the event, and that is the candidate for the UK Independence Party, second on their list, Carl Benjamin. Carl Benjamin is better known by his YouTube alias, Sargon of Akkad, where in combination with other YouTube channels he's accrued over 1.5 million subscribers. However, during this campaign he has attracted controversy on his tour of the Southwest region, where he has been debating members of the general public as well as the mainstream media. I'm briefly going to run through the format of today's event. This event is being live streamed, so you can send in your comments and we'll try and pick those up and pose them to the candidates as we go along. We're going to start with Carl giving us a short speech, 5 to 10 minutes in length, outlining why he believes you should vote for him or for his party in the upcoming elections. We're then going to move on to a series of questions that I have prepared. These have been submitted in part by the audience that were meant to attend our public hustings, and of course we'll read out some of the comments that you submit on the live stream too. So without further ado, Carl.
Hello. Right. So I believe that you should vote for the UK Independence Party because they are the only Brexit party that is an actual party, and Brexit is not the only thing that they wish to discuss. They actually have a rather good interim manifesto written by Jared Batten that actually does hit all of the major notes of all of the subjects that my activism generally revolves around. And they're on the right side of those subjects, in my opinion. Obviously, I don't need to explain that UKIP is a pro-Brexit party. And so really I need to just focus on talking about the other aspects of the party and the manifesto that I think are important. For me, I'm a free speech activist, so their commitment to free speech is particularly resonates with me, especially as I went over to the European Union in Strasbourg, the Parliament in Strasbourg, to campaign against the Article 13, set Article 13 of the Copyright Directive. It passed, so we were unsuccessful there, but there is actually another vote on that coming, I believe, next spring, before it's actually implemented as a directive and the member states have to sign that into law. This is going to have a dramatic effect on the way that we use the internet at the moment, and not for the better for the general public. It's going to be bad for the general public, but it's going to be very good for those record labels and artists who feel that they're losing money because of clips of their work being shared on social media. This is obviously not the only thing that the UK Independence Party is concerned about, but this is my primary concern because I use the internet for my profession. And I may be slightly ahead of the curve here, but I think that this is a trend that's going to be ever more increasing. I think it's the older generations who tend not to use the internet as much as the younger generations, and so as more people continue to become of age and find themselves on the internet, I think that it's important that we preserve their liberties intact as we receive them. I don't believe that's going to happen as we carry on, if we carry on as we are. I think really that's about all I'd like to say. So,
thank you very much. Okay, we'll start off with something about your party. You say that UKIP's a real party. I want to know what in UKIP's manifesto, as it currently sits, do you disagree with?
I actually very much disagree with there's just one line that really sticks out to me, and it's about reviving the coal industry. Now, I don't know why that was put in, and I assume that it was put in to offer the prospect of jobs to northern communities that in previous eras had done that on a grand scale. But I think that that time has passed, and I don't think it's really going to be very viable to revive that, even if not for economic reasons, but for moral reasons regarding climate change and the environment. And I think that nuclear power would be a much more safe and clean and probably efficient alternative to having any policies about reviving coal power stations. I would very much like to see a push towards nuclear on that.
Okay, we can stick with the topic of energy dependency for the moment. The EU does, I should say, there's lots of criticisms of the European Union and different member states within it because they rely upon different countries for natural resources. If elected as an MEP, how would you approach this, significant geopolitical issue?
It depends what you want to get done, but even then, I don't even think that an MEP has any significant power in this regard. But personally, if I were the one who got to set the policy and it could be agreed upon, I would like to see, and I don't know why we don't talk about this more, but I would like to see a general push away from fossil fuels where possible. Not in some kind of radical environmentalist Green New Deal where we're going to get rid of aeroplanes and cows, but reducing our dependence on oil would be a good thing in my opinion. So I'd like to see government initiatives that would incentivize people to get electric cars. You could set up electric charging stations wherever need be, all that sort of thing. And it's not just good for the environment, obviously. It does have wider geostrategic ramifications. For example, I just cannot morally approve of the regimes that we are dependent on for oil. I just can't. And I think that if we can move away from a dependency on oil, then we will infinitesimally weaken their influence over our countries by degree. And so if we, for every year get X number of cars off of oil, then in 10 or 15 years' time, then we can hopefully really reduce their influence over our country altogether.
So you would propose big upward investment into renewable energies because currently the alternative to oil would be natural gas, of which the largest provider to the EU is Russia.
Yes.
Yeah.
To put simply, I think I can't see why we wouldn't want to take advantage of clean energy sources, of which I consider nuclear to be one. I think that's the most viable method going forward. I actually saw a report the other day that suggested that it was actually the safest, contrary to the hysterical fear-mongering regarding Soviet power stations and power stations that have been built on earthquake fault lines vulnerable to tsunamis. If you actually look at the data, it's actually one of the more safe methods, and clean as well.
Okay, in your previous answer, you just said that you don't believe that MEPs have much power to change things. So if you were elected, what would you aim to actually do whilst an MEP?
Well, I'd do my duty, of course. An MEP can amend or vote for or against proposals from the Commission. So that's the limit of an MEP's direct power. And obviously I'd vote against any proposal from the Commission that was seek to further undermine Britain's sovereignty, hurt Britain during the Brexit process, or otherwise oppose our national interests, obviously. But failing that, I think the most important thing an MEP can do is use the minute or so that they get on the floor to raise issues that are not being talked about. And there are many issues that are not being talked about in a direct way that need to be spoken about. I think there's far too much pussyfooting around because of political correctness, and I think that we need to address some issues head on and clearly.
Do you have an example of some of these issues?
Yes, the proliferation of radical Islam in this country is a real concern of mine. I mean, one of the major concerns that I think a lot of people in Britain have but don't really know how to voice is the fact that we see in parts of Britain large numbers of abayas, which is the full body, head to foot, with a covering of the eyes for certain Muslim women in certain communities. This is not universal or anything like that, but this is something that's become noticed by visitors to Britain who are also Muslim. I mean, there are many Muslim countries that ban this kind of dress because this is signified. I mean, this is usually taken to be an example of Islam at its most extreme. If you actually ask them why they're wearing it, they say it's a sign of devotion to God. This is why, for example, in Syria it's banned, because this is how ISIS would run a country. And I think that we send the wrong message to the world when we say this is the kind of Islam that we want in Britain. It's not the kind of Islam they want in France or Denmark, where they've banned the burqa. It's not the kind of Islam that they want in Turkey or Syria, where they have also done the same. And I don't think really the most extreme form of Islam that we can think of should be the kind that we essentially define Islam as. But I do think that that's kind of how the political establishment here actually thinks of it. The most pure version is the real version, and that's given a remarkable amount of protection. I think that's not wise.
So would you have any recommendations as to how to stem the proliferation of radical Islamic terrorism in the country?
Yes, I think that there's no getting around the fact that the British state is going to have to effectively choose a form of Islam that it finds socially compatible with the country and promote that. And I do think that there are certain strains of Islam that should be prohibited from being taught in mosques, particularly Wahhabism and Deobandism, which is probably a very controversial statement to the people who know what those are, but those people are probably quite severe in their own beliefs.
So earlier you said that you're a free speech activist and you describe yourself as a civil libertarian, if I can use that term.
That's correct.
So how would you balance the call for the banning of certain teachings, or if I can...
That's a misrepresentation of what I said. I don't want to ban the teachings. People should be able to be free in their own private time to read what they want, post advocacy for any kind that they want. But I think that when you have institutions, they come with a particular kind of gravitas, particular kind of authority, and I think that we do have to be careful of that. I mean, in every mosque in Saudi Arabia, they have cameras to monitor the imams themselves to make sure they're not teaching anything that would be considered revolutionary. If it's good enough for Saudi Arabia, then I think that ourselves having this kind of more sort of precautious attitude towards radical Islam, I think that could only benefit everyone. You know, 'cause what we're talking about here is a tiny percentage of the Muslim communities that are actually hardline fundamentalists in this way. And I'm relatively certain that if you ask the average Muslim in the country, they would prefer a less hardline version of Islam being taught. Now, I'm not saying that this is more mosques or anything like that, but I think that there is a problem. I mean, there have been lots of leaked videos from the mosques that have been teaching some pretty awful things, in my opinion. And I don't think that we can allow that to go unchallenged. And I realise that as soon as you start saying this sort of thing, hordes of angry activists on the other side wish to accuse you of all kinds of things. But I think that we have to ignore the allegations and actually look at what is right and what is wrong. And I think that what some mosques in this country teach is not right.
Okay, I didn't mean to
No,
misrepresent
that's
you
not- it's not
if
your
you
fault.
think that that's the case. But this is essentially a balance of saying maybe increased levels of surveillance would be helpful, but also if you're against, for example, Article 13, or in the British government's case, the Investigatory Powers Act, where is the right balance between a surveillance state that can keep its citizens safe and individual liberties?
Well, that's a great question. It's the question for the ages, and it's not something that you can draw a defined line on, I think. Really, it is about being reasonable. You have to judge each case as it comes. I'm not sure there is a hard and fast rule, but I do think that if the British government were to take under its wing a form of Islam that is a lot more moderate than some that we see proliferating in this country, and promote that, or not necessarily promote it, but recognise that would be probably the best term. I think that would be a step in the right direction, because I think there are a lot of people who haven't come to terms with the fact that Islam is a part of Britain now. You know, there are Muslims here; they're not going to be leaving.
Some would say it's been part of Britain for a very, very long time.
I think that the very small minorities of Muslims that would have been here prior to the Tony Blair government, I don't think they would have significantly changed the culture of the country. But I think that the number of Muslims that are here now does, and I think that we have to recognise that and talk about that. We have to normalise these things, and I think that it's not an unrealistic stretch for the indigenous population of the country to say, okay, it's fine that you're here, and it's fine that you've brought new beliefs here, because a lot of it is very interesting, frankly. But there are aspects to it that are pernicious, and I think that we can all, as adults, recognise that and take action against the pernicious elements. Nothing particularly bad has to happen. I think it's just an understanding of this going forward. So I think that that's something we can achieve when we're not talking to hysterical activists who simply aren't capable of listening.
I don't want to spend the whole of this talking about this issue, but we will say recently during the process when you became a UKIP member, Tommy Robinson became an advisor to UKIP.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this is taking the party in the right direction?
I think it's taking the party in the morally correct direction. I don't think it's a morally correct thing to do to pretend that there aren't problems, because there are problems. In the last 2 months, 38 men and 2 women were arrested in Rotherham for crimes that ranged between 1997, I believe it was, and 2015. That's concerning to me, because that's a year after Dr. Alexis Jay's report was released that showed that not only were these crimes happening on quite a large scale, but there was a great deal of complicity with the councillors and the police because they were afraid of being called racist. So these things, political correctness is permitting these things to carry on, and we can't allow that to happen. Recently I spoke to a woman in Totnes who had moved down to Totnes from Hull because she was not happy with the way that the community, that the Pakistani Muslim community, I think it was Hull, that was now living there, was treating the surrounding community, and the lack of response to these negative interactions from the police. They didn't feel like they were safe, and that's not fair.
Okay, we will move on to some more inter-party issues. So, in these elections or otherwise, what do you think is an important issue that you don't feel other parties are addressing?
Well,
you can either go through all the parties or have an overarching issue.
None of the parties will address the pernicious influence of political correctness in our society. And maybe it's because I'm the target of it and I'm the one receiving the ire of it, but it's really quite disgraceful at this point. Where does outrage culture stop? At what point do we say that enough is enough? Roger Scruton had completely benign statements taken out of context, and the Conservatives did not even think to check or defend him. They just dropped him as soon as they could, because they were afraid of the Twitter mob coming after them, because they have no spines. Labour are the Labour are the primary movers of the Twitter mob, so they're obviously off that list. They're the ones who are pushing political correctness. And the Liberal Democrats have been entirely subverted by socialists. They think that liberalism is not about liberty, it is about equality, which is actually what communism is about. So I don't trust any of the parties in this country to get any of it done. And I don't think that they have the stones to stand up to it.
You talk about the power of the Twitter mob. You're currently not on Twitter, nor personally, and you also had the campaign page that was set up specifically for this election deleted as well. How big of an issue do you think is online censorship in this country, and what do you think about efforts being made continentally on the issue?
I don't agree that there are any efforts being made against censorship continentally on the issue. I think the European Union is going to become one of the prime causes of censorship across Europe because of Article 13, which is why it's all the more imperative that we leave the European Union now. But it's not about this country, because social media isn't confined to one country. And the problem is coming from Silicon Valley, and it's coming from their particularly stringent standards on things like hate speech. I mean, Facebook actually today has announced that it's going to be taking a sort of one-strike policy to any live streams that they find objectionable, and they've been cracking down on now what can only be described as political opinions. So it's one thing saying you can't say X word to Y person on our platform. You can't insult someone on a protected characteristic. That's one thing, and you can understand fine. And that's led to a lot of feminist activists getting suspensions for insulting men, because gender is a protected characteristic. And black activists are being suspended for insulting white people, because race is a protected characteristic. But now, I mean, Candace Owens, black activist, conservative activist from the US, has had her Facebook page suspended for 7 days for saying that left-wing policies incentivize single parenthood, I think it was. Now, you can disagree with that if you like, and say, well, I don't think that's a fair characterization of the policy. I think that the philosophy that leads up to that opinion is flawed, and I can say why. But you can't just suspend someone for having that kind of political opinion. It's not hateful. It's what they have a sincere conviction about, and it's going to get worse. And this is why Donald Trump has opened up a page on the White House website for people to share their stories of being censored on social media, because it has become such a bad problem at the moment. It's always targeted one way. I mean, recently a swathe of conservative activists were banned from Facebook, and you can say, well, X person said why, but when you get to someone like Paul Joseph Watson, who's a very middle of the road conservative, he doesn't hold any radical beliefs, and nothing that would bar him from the Conservative Party in this country. But he was deplatformed anyway, without any good reason being given, and I really do think something has to be done.
I'll ask you a double question. So, what do you think should be done to tackle online censorship? And you raise Paul Joseph Watson, along with Count Dankula. He was one of the YouTubers that joined UKIP at the same time that you did. Now, Paul Joseph Watson works for InfoWars, which has famously made various videos about various conspiracy theories. I know he personally has made some about vaccines. So why should people take you or the current form of UKIP seriously when the party consists of actual conspiracy theorists?
I don't actually think it's fair to describe Watson as a conspiracy theorist.
Not in his entirety.
How many years ago was the statement that you're referring to made?
I think it was 2015.
So it's 4 years. I mean, I've known him for about 3, I'd say, and I've spent a good deal of time with him, and I've never heard him come out with anything I would consider to be conspiratorial. I mean, he's never mentioned anything about vaccines to me, and I'm not even sure if he actually is still with InfoWars. I believe he set up his own news site now called Summit. So I don't know. I think.
But would you be uncomfortable if there was a direct association with InfoWars?
No, because most InfoWars is really an entertainment site. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I don't watch a lot of InfoWars stuff, but I like a lot of the Alex Jones memes. I think they're very funny, and I think that honestly most of it is, it's kind of like libertarian entertainment. I don't even know how to describe it because it's such a unique thing. And I think that the wider culture just didn't understand why people enjoyed watching Alex Jones. That's not to say that he doesn't bear any responsibility for things he says. Of course, I mean, Alex Jones gets sued dozens of times every year for the crazy things that come out of his mouth. He just fights those lawsuits in the courts, which is what you should do. I don't think censorship is the answer to anything. And if anything, they've actually made Alex Jones a more loved figure because now he's a martyr. And he didn't really do anything wrong. He just said silly things. So I think that turning him into that was a bad idea. But no, I don't consider Paul Jesse Wilson to be a conspiracy theorist. What was the first part of the question again?
What do you think we can do to tackle the rise
of
violence?
I mean, ultimately, I think that in the United States, what they need to do is bring out a digital bill of rights, because at the moment, if you would never set up a state in the way that social media has been set up, you would never. I mean, the CEOs of the tech giants of Silicon Valley are like Louis XIV. They're the absolute monarchs. Everyone else is at their beck and call. And when they say something, it can just happen, and they can give you a digital death sentence with absolutely no recourse. There's no trial, there's no evidence. Their terms and conditions don't even matter. These are a mere formality. I actually think that the responsibility for suspending people from suspending accounts, not necessarily deleting posts, because that's an immediate problem if there's a Christchurch shooting or something. I completely understand Facebook needs to be able to pull that down as soon as possible. But when it comes to the accounts of public figures and just regular users, I definitely think that the decision-making power should actually be taken on to, I don't know, some kind of jury or trial, where there's actually a way of fighting your case in a public court, and not being judged merely by the particular activists who are working at these Silicon Valley tech giants. And I call them activists because they do have a particular kind of political bias. I mean, there's actually a union of conservatives working in Facebook who have unionized because of the left-wing bias within the company. Google is very much the same, as James Damore's knows. I don't want to call it manifesto because it really wasn't, but it's James Damore's memo, as that showed. And I mean, none of the tech giants ever question this. You know, Jack Dorsey openly admits he's got a left-wing bias. They all do. They know they do. It's the culture there. And that brings with it a certain kind of moral standard that isn't necessarily shared by people of different political persuasions. And so it's really quite unfair to judge one with the other. I mean, for example, transphobic speech is banned on Twitter. Now, that's a highly political topic. That is one of the sort of bleeding edge of politics at the moment, is the debate around trans issues. And to say, right, there can only be one narrative on that, there can only be one way of speaking about this. In fact, a doctor had spent his life researching into transgender issues, had posted his findings on Twitter, and I suppose these must have been, I didn't even see them before I learned the account was banned until someone had sent me the information. But so I didn't even see what the information was, but apparently it was sufficiently un-PC to get his account suspended. That's the sort of thing that, I mean, you spend years building up these social media platforms and creating content for the site, and as soon as you become someone of note, they can just take that away from you in an instant.
So you're calling for less of a ministry of truth and more of a citizen's jury of truth?
Well, it's if you've got a better idea, I'm happy to hear it. I mean, Jack Dorsey described Twitter as a human right. He described social media as a human right. Well, if that's the case, then we should probably have a right to a fair trial when we're being judged on the content we put up. That's what I think.
So just a second ago, you said that you and various of your colleagues are involved in what could potentially be described as libertarian entertainment.
Yes.
Now, throughout the campaign, you have been quizzed by mainstream media outlets on a series of statements and subsequent tweets that you made that you have claimed were simply a joke, taken out of context, but all part of a larger meta-narrative.
Correct.
Should someone that makes those kinds of jokes be a suitable candidate for political office to represent people that would almost certainly be offended by those jokes?
I think so, yeah. I don't see why that would be a problem, because the issues that I'm raising are not confined to me. I mean, thousands of people a year in this country are arrested for posts on social media, and it's frankly getting quite dicey out there. In 2017, there were 1,500 convictions for posts on social media, and we've actually come to the point where now the police are investigating people over jokes. They're convicting people over jokes. They are fining them £800 over jokes. I really think we've gone down the wrong path here. This seems like the path towards a very restrictive and frankly totalitarian society, because people have got to remember that social media is a panopticon. There's no getting away from it. You know, once it's on the internet, it exists forever, effectively. And so this is why Andrew Neil was asking Ben Shapiro about a tweet from 2012. That's not relevant. A 7-year-old tweet is not relevant. No one has to hear about that, but for some reason, Andrew Neil decided to go down, and this is why Ben Shapiro accused him of being a leftist, because he was just digging up offence archaeology from 7 years ago and saying, what do you say to this, Mr. Shapiro? But the joke was actually with Andrew Neil, because Shapiro had answered this years ago in a column that he's got on the website saying that these are bad things that I've written, and he said that in the interview. I can't remember what the question was. That's that gone for me.
Should people that make these kinds of
That's
jokes?
right, yeah. Yes. Well, all things are dependent on context. I mean, I'm not a daytime entertainer, so I'm not going to start making jokes, here and now, because it wouldn't be the appropriate context. But if I'm in the atmosphere of a comedy club, say on my YouTube channel, making a video that's marked comedy or a live stream or something like that, sure. I mean, I don't see why we have to pretend that we don't have a sense of humour. But I think there's a time and place, and anyone knows that. I think this has been wildly overblown, and this is really what I'm talking about when it comes to the sort of tyranny of political correctness. There's no need to talk about a joke that I made in a comedy video. I mean, I made a lot of jokes in that video, but it was the one that got them offended that they decided, oh, that's right, we're going to misrepresent that. So that's good, because there are lots of other jokes in that video that you didn't misrepresent. No, I don't see how that's a factor. And if the media would stop shoving it in people's faces, then no one other than the people it was intended for would see it. So.
You've claimed that the mainstream media, you've labelled them, I believe the term's dirty smear versions.
That's correct.
And that they've completely manufactured or misconstrued this tweet or this joke into what they've called as the rape tweet.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that they have been successful in tarnishing you with that label?
I don't know. I never get any complaints. It's only ever activists who care about their cause that complain to me.
Because in
they were complaining already.
In the course of organising this event, when people asked who was on the panel, most people didn't know you by your real name. Some people knew you by your YouTube alias, but as soon as it was mentioned, people would recognise you as the rape tweets guy.
Well, there we go. That's what happens when you get smeared by the media. And if you think it won't happen to you, just wait.
Following on from our last question, other entertainers, for example, those that I think even you have used to defend the offensive nature of your jokes, Ricky Gervais, Frankie Boyle, Jimmy Carr, do you think that if they ran for political office, even though everyone at the time acknowledged what they were saying were jokes, they would still be picked up in the same way that you are?
No, it's one rule for one and one rule for another. The way this works is there are a series of systems, mostly focused on London, that you need to work your way up in. And if you step out of line, you can. There are acceptable spaces that are created in the systems. For example, Ricky Gervais' Netflix specials, which would probably get me deplatformed off of YouTube. These are fine because he is Ricky Gervais. It is his Netflix special, and there's an understanding because he is tied into the existing structures that surround him. He's a known quantity. He will be known to obey the rules when required. But people on YouTube and various other social media sites aren't part of those networks. We're outside of them. And this makes us some kind of threat to these networks. I think that if it can be shown that people can succeed without all of the surrounding infrastructure required to make someone like Ricky Gervais happen, then it makes the people who run these networks nervous. And I think that they don't like that. And I think it's a class issue, really, because these form sort of a class of people. And then when you see someone else outside of that, well, how do you know that you're going to have any influence over them at all? This could be some renegade who might say anything about anything. So you've got to be careful.
But you would agree that people seeking political office are held to account on things they believe and things that they have said. Sometimes these things aren't jokes. You've referenced the Andrew Neil, Ben Shapiro interview. There was also the Andrew Marr, Nigel Farage interview at the weekend, which is a very similar situation.
Well, doesn't that just go to show to the pathology of the media? It's all about moral purity. It's not about... I mean, I don't know what Nigel Farage believes or Ben Shapiro believes from those interviews. You wouldn't be able to divine it. You'd just be sat there going, well, Andrew Neil or... was it Andrew Marr, sorry? Neil and Mark, they get offended by certain things that they may have said in the past, but that doesn't tell me anything about their plans for the future.
In that vein, I'm going to ask you about comments that you've made.
Sure.
Naturally. In 2018, in a live discussion with Michelle Catlin, supposedly provoked by alt-right chat room users' insults, you said in response to people in the comment section, you were acting like a bunch of the N-word, just so you know you act like white N-word. My perception of that is that that wasn't a joke, that was authentic use of the word. So why should anyone vote for someone that deems it acceptable to use those kinds of racial slurs?
Because I don't think they're racial slurs when they're being applied to Nazis. I think they have a particular context, again, that actually explains what's going on. And this is what Sam Harris agreed with when he shut down his Patreon in defense of me, and so did Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin. They understood exactly what was going on, because, again, it really comes from being in the online space. There are no hard and fast boundaries. And so any community can find itself targeted by other communities that are small and pernicious and wish to spread a particular ideology and infiltrate other spaces. Now, when you've got a very large YouTube channel, you end up with a very large community, and it's an amorphous one. It's very porous. There's no determining who is what. And so essentially, you have to start staking out ideological boundaries. Now, I've done that in principle by making arguments against Nazism and things like this. But the activists who are doing this to your channel or to your space don't really care about that, because a lot of what they do is a lot more visceral. They don't really have anything to lose. They're using anonymous accounts with anime avatars or something like that, and they are looking to hurt you as a person. They're not looking to debate your ideas. And so what you have to do is essentially respond in kind, offend them, to try and make them leave you alone, and to make them understand that your community is not a safe space for what they believe. And so after 6 months of this happening to me, the only thing, I was quite exasperated at the time, because I've been harassing my wife, my kids go to school, things like this. It'd been quite intense. And I couldn't think of any other way than actually taking because the behaviour they were exhibiting was exactly like the behaviour of which they would accuse black people in America of, using the N-word, of course. And so I saw no problem with repackaging that word and then just throwing it back up and saying, no, you were exactly the thing that you were complaining about. And so, hence the statement.
Okay, it's interesting that you say that this was in response to neo-Nazis or the far right. The panellist that dropped out of our hustings in protest of your presence was Councillor Carla Denyer. She represents the Clifton Down Ward on Bristol City Council, and as part of her quote on her blog post where she outlined why she was boycotting the event, she goes on to explain why she's concerned about the dangerous creep of the far right. So if I could read to you
Please.
Her quote, and then you can respond in turn. The dangerous creep of the far right into mainstream politics is enabled by well-meaning people offering them platforms out of a sense of fairness. But while the protection of free speech is important, we have to guard against the far right taking advantage of it. The difference between the far right and other political philosophies is that they use the democratic structures and free speech of a liberal democracy specifically to destroy that liberal democracy. So to defend our democracy, it is important not to provide them with a platform, especially those, like Benjamin, who have made not just political incitements, but allegedly outright violent threats.
Right, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I don't know how else to put it. I'm a limited government constitutionalist. I'm a liberal. I do not want the state taking over every aspect of my life, which is why I'm a free speech activist. I find it very interesting how she'll use the language of censorship in order to defend free speech and democracy, whereas censorship is actually the quickest way, in my opinion, to destroy it. I think censorship radicalizes people. I don't think she knows what the far right is, and I don't even think any of them actually can define far right, because, I mean, to me, that's sort of like Mises, Milton Friedman, extreme libertarianism, I would have thought was far right. And even then, I'm not nearly anywhere near pathologizing the state to that degree. I think the state is a necessary actor that makes the country. It has to exist. And it has to have, obviously, lots of restrictions on it and a great deal of accountability. But I don't agree that Nazism or fascism is necessarily right-wing. I mean, all of the fascists were socialists first. And I think that fascism is really just a more honest accounting of what socialism requires to become a state. Because, I mean, if you look at, like, say, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and fascist Italy, they basically operated in the same way. They had a centralized economy, they had a secret police, they had gulags or death camps or whatever it is for political undesirables, they extinguished free speech, they extinguished democracy. They look very, very similar. And there's a reason, I think, when you actually look into the writings of the fascists themselves, I mean, they coined the term totalitarianism. And so I as a liberal, just sat there like, well, obviously this is bad. I could never agree to anything like that. But they specifically, I mean, Mussolini edited a socialist newspaper for 10 years until he decided, in the doctrine of fascism, that socialism was a dead doctrine. They rejected socialism because they didn't feel that it could achieve the goals that they were looking for. They rejected liberalism for many different reasons, but one of which, obviously, the creation of the separation between the public and the private, which is what the fascists are trying to erase with the idea of totalitarianism. But also because the liberal state was always meant to be a night watchman. It was meant to just guard your rights, keep you safe, and make sure no harm came to you, so you could live at your ease and live in freedom and live your life as you want. Instead, the fascists wanted, as they put it, an ethical state. So it's not a state that does good things, by our reckoning probably. It's a state that has an ethical agenda. So it's got a goal in mind that it must mould the citizenry into fitting. And honestly, we're really starting to see the effects of an ethical state operating in this country. And I find it really, really disturbing. I really think that we need to start returning to a model of neutrality amongst our political institutions. And the thing that bothered me the most, I think, was when I saw pride flags on police cars. Now, I'm an atheist. I have absolutely no moral objection to homosexuality. I'm completely in favour of people being able to marry any adults they want. However, the police are meant to be politically neutral. They're meant to be impartial. And the pride flag, whether you agree with it or not, and there are many Muslims in this country, as described by the BBC, conservative Muslims, who do not agree with the pride flag and what it stands for, this is a political issue, and it should not be appearing on police cars. It should not be something that police paint on their faces. It shouldn't be flags that they wave. That's not impartiality. That's an ethical state. That's a state that has an ethical agenda. And, well, do you trust them to take you to a place, or do you want to go to where you want to go on your own? And that's the question.
Some would argue that these are civil rights issues and not necessarily political ones, but ones of...
There's no question that that's a political question.
But it's the case of enfranchising everyone with the same level of rights.
I don't agree that there's any difference between the rights of a gay man and a straight man in this country. They both have the same rights. What access to self-determination does a straight person have that a gay person doesn't in this country? It's a political tribe, and there are lots of political tribes, and none of them should be represented by the police, because then that makes the police just another political tribe. That's the problem with the sort of ideological subversion of our institutions. It shouldn't be happening.
Some would argue that I guess the only instance is in donating blood, but I guess there is still potential medical reasons.
I think there are pragmatic reasons for that.
Okay, we'll try and make some more ground. You rose to prominence in the heat of the Gamergate scandal,
That's correct.
Which I remember very well. But in recent years, do you think that there's anything that social justice movements have achieved that you agree with?
What have they achieved?
What have they achieved that you've disagreed with?
Well, they've achieved a great deal of censorship. They're becoming increasingly tyrannical, and they're turning our culture into an outrage culture of the most trivial and petty things. I can't think of anything that they've achieved that's good though, because what is there left to achieve? You know, everyone has the same rights at this point. Well, actually, in many ways, men actually have fewer rights than other demographics. But in principle and on paper, I don't honestly see a problem, and I don't think that our institutions are biased against minorities. There was actually a study, a report done about deaths in police custody. I researched this because of the Black Lives Matter protests in Heathrow Airport a couple of years back, where they shut down the airport for an afternoon. All white activists, just so you know. And so I went and looked up the figures, and it turns out that white British people are much more likely to die in police custody than people from a black or ethnic minority background. It's an inverse of what it's like in America, but this is an ideological importation from the States where they do have a problem in that regard. And it's just not, it doesn't work in this country. It doesn't make any sense because the numbers are the reverse. So why are they running around screaming Black Lives Matter? They don't really know what they're talking about. I don't see any legitimacy to anything that they're doing.
So you say that this is something that's primarily born from the United States. We can relate this very well to our own situation right now, but do you think that students engaging more politically is a positive thing, even though it has resulted in an increase in deplatformings?
I think students should get on with their studies. I'm serious. You don't need to be involved in politics. You don't know what you're talking about. You're like 21 years old. I mean, I'm 39 and I still don't know what I'm talking about. So, you've been fed half a narrative from your Marxist professor, and you've been given a bunch of false information that's led you to think that everything you disagree with is fascism. And you just don't know. Just get on with your studies. It's a more productive use of your time. And I'm not joking when I say this. I mean, there have been examples in America, particularly, of like students reporting burnout, where they're not getting their studies done. They're constantly worried about the white supremacy that's all around them. And it's like, come on, you're obviously brainwashing kids to become radical activists for your own personal ends. Let these kids get on with their studies.
Some of us do study hard sciences, though.
Good. We're going to need you.
Well, on the issue of deplatforming, if Carla's intention was to deprive you a platform, well, we've seen the result of
it didn't work.
That.
I don't know why she'd deprive herself either. I mean, I would love to have these kinds of conversations with these political activists because, I mean, really, I just don't think they know what they're talking about. I don't think they've done the graft in order to get to the point where we can actually have a detailed and nuanced conversation on these things. But by the way, I told a joke in a video a while ago, so maybe you don't want to vote for me because of that.
Well, we'd like to clarify that the rest of the candidates didn't join the boycott. It was only the Green Party. It was only subsequent to the university cancelling the event that, due to logistical reasons, we are left with just Carl here today. I guess you've answered that. In the last European Union elections, UKIP, it could be considered that they won. They won the most number of MEPs out of any British political party. Today, a YouGov/The Times poll has UKIP polling on 3%. That's below Change UK / the independent group /
Change
UK. Why do you think this is the case?
I think that the polls are very rarely accurate. They weren't accurate for Trump, they weren't accurate for Brexit, and I think that when you look at the way that the polling is done, it tells you why. I mean, YouGov in particular, I only know how this works because my wife signed up for it. It's a self-selected email poll, which does not give you a representative sample. In fact, this is actually very similar to the way that the feminist activists in the United States ended up coming up with the 1 in 5 women who have been raped at university campuses. Self-selecting polls are not deliberately, but inherently skewed, because the people who want to talk about and want to respond to these kind of things go and find them. And so you end up getting the responses from the politically engaged people who happen to be following, say, Westminster media. But I mean, in other ways, like for example, between 18 and 25, UKIP's polling at double the Brexit party at 14%. We're the second most popular party in the UK with young people. And I think it is because they are aware that their liberty online is at threat. And we're the only party that's actually speaking about this. And so yeah, I would be wary of the polls generally.
So you believe that UKIP will actually do much better than is being suggested, do you think that you'll get elected?
Well, no. I think the field's far too crowded for that now. But I don't know what the result will be. I don't know. You know, we'll see on the day. That's the only poll that matters.
Since you joined the UK Independence Party, do you think you have raised UKIP's profile more, or do you think that UKIP has raised your profile more?
I don't know, actually.
As in, are you a net beneficiary to them, or are they a net beneficiary to you?
I would suggest that I'm a net beneficiary to them. I mean, the youth polling, I think, is indicative. I'd also like to see the next age bracket up, because the average age of my audience is 30. So I would like to see that as well, but I haven't seen that. But I mean, you know, when I joined UKIP, it had 17,000 members. Now it's got over 30,000 members. So it seems to be growing.
And do you think that UKIP will be a force to be reckoned with into the future beyond this election?
Yes, this election is an aberration. It's all smoke and mirrors. No one involved in it can actually do anything about anything. So, I mean, it's being made it's a new Brexit referendum. Well, none of the people involved can do anything about Brexit. So,
we should probably talk about Brexit a little bit then.
let's talk about Brexit.
Why should people vote for UKIP over the Brexit Party?
They should join UKIP because they can't join the Brexit Party. Really, there's not going to be too much difference, really. But I mean, you know, we're both going to be advocating for a hard Brexit as soon as possible. I mean, at the moment, 80% of businesses say that they've come to the Bank of England, 80% of the businesses in this country say they're ready for a no-deal Brexit. They've been preparing. I mean, I guess the one thing about having another 3-year negotiation being dragged out is the fact that it at least gives businesses time to get ready for that sort of thing. And I think it's imperative that we get out sooner rather than later. I don't know whether you've seen the, I think it was a BBC 4 documentary, from the Fly on the Wall documentary inside the EU, where, and the thing that really sprung to my mind was when one of Guy Verhofstadt's aides yelled out something like, "We've turned them into a colony," which is a reference, I suppose, to Theresa May's deal, which she's going to try and get through Parliament once more. They don't respect us. They think that we're a joke, and they're going to treat us like one. And because of the way that we're handling this, we are infinitely strengthening their hand. And that's not a problem for us if we leave, but it will be a problem for other member states of the European Union when it's in any way they find themselves challenging the power structure of the bureaucracy itself. They'll find their hand weakened because the European Union will come out of this debacle stronger, and there'll be a more push towards centralisation, not right away, but certainly in the near future, because it's to their advantage and they'll be able to do it. UKIP are also the only other party that are actually going to talk about things other than Brexit. There's no way the Brexit Party is going to talk about any of the concerning issues like free speech or political correctness or the kind of Islam that we should be promoting or accepting in this country. They're not going to talk about it, even though Nigel Farage has talked about all of these things at length. There's also no chance of the Brexit Party actually finding a manifesto. What is George Galloway and Anne Widdecombe going to agree on? What are they going to agree on? Like, they're never going to agree on anything. The Brexit Party's got a surprising number of radical communists in it. I mean, everyone was criticising Theresa May for having a negotiation with Jeremy Corbyn because, you know, why are you getting in bed with the Marxists? Well, is it any different? So, yes, vote for us. We're the only party who's going to tell it to you straight.
At the moment, we're in deadlock on Brexit, and now, whilst you may not believe there's much you could do as an MEP, how do you foresee, if UKIP sticks around as a political force in British politics, that you can deliver upon a hard Brexit? We've seen today that the negotiations between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have broken down because the Labour Party claimed that not enough concessions were made, and as long as the parliamentary arithmetic remains the same, it's very unlikely that much will happen. So what would you advocate for? How do you foresee getting out of this situation that we're in?
At the moment, we're just relying on the Conservatives to eventually deliver it. There's really not much we can do without another general election, which is not going to be called. So we're kind of stuck in this position, and all anyone can really do is advocacy. Naturally, that's exactly what I do. But really, there's, you know, how are you going to solve world hunger? thought, well, I'm going to do what I can, but it's really come beyond my power to fix this, I'm afraid. But I think just pointed commentary will have to do for the time being.
We're coming towards the end of my prepared questions. We've got a singular journalist in the audience who works for our student newspaper, so if you've got any questions.
Hi, I'm from Hub Voice. Earlier on, you equated the Liberal Democrats to communism. You said that they don't agree with liberalism. Earlier in the week, there was a story, you might have seen it. Did you see there was a facial recognition trial in London, and a man covered his face, and he was fined £90 for disorderly conduct by the police.
No, I didn't see that.
What would you say to that?
We shouldn't be trialing. We shouldn't have facial recognition software done in this country.
Right.
I think it's the first step towards a kind of technocratic dictatorship. The government doesn't need to know where you are at all times. It's not their business.
Would you agree that the man had the right to cover his face in that sort
Of course he did.
Okay, so I would just like to ask you why you had said that you agreed with Saudi Arabia's use of cameras to monitor imams to make sure they're not teaching anything revolutionary. You had said that abayas, in relation to cameras, you said that abayas should be banned, and just like France and was it Denmark have banned the burqa, and you believe in civil liberties and you believe in limited government. How is that compatible with banning the burqa and restricting the rights of Muslim women to cover their faces when you think that other people should be able to cover their faces?
None of these things are contradictions. In the privacy of their own home, women can wear whatever they want. But I mean, we already restrict what people can wear in certain public spaces.
Right, so you think that the person had the right to not show their face in the public?
I think you should have that right in principle. I do agree. But I think there are also pragmatic concerns, like the proliferation of extreme forms of religion. Unfortunately, we do have to compromise in certain regards. Now,
So when you're a Muslim, you shouldn't be allowed to cover your face?
If you let me finish.
Sure.
Thank you. Now, it doesn't have to be restricted to any particular one religion, and it doesn't necessarily have to be everywhere in public. It could be restricted to certain venues or whatever. So no, I don't believe that that's a problem. What were the other points you brought up very quickly there?
You said about cameras monitoring imams to make sure they're not teaching anything revolutionary, that you agreed with Saudi Arabia's use of cameras.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's the problem there?
Is that not potentially dangerous for freedom of speech and expression in this country if we start introducing cameras for people to monitor others?
We already have those. We're the most monitored society in all of human history.
Yeah, but is a mosque not a semi-private space?
No, I think they're a public space, and I mean, they may be a privately owned space, but they're still for the public to use in the same way that a pub is. Now, if there were people in pubs teaching neo-Nazism, and this was a real problem amongst the pubs in the small areas of England, then I would say, yeah, maybe we should do something about that if they're producing like Christchurch shooters. But there's no question that the MI5 are constantly arresting people who are plotting terror attacks. Now, I don't want this to be the case, but we have to look reality in the face and say, okay, there's clearly a problem here, and there's clearly something that we can do, and I think that there is a duty of care to the public. So yeah, I don't see any problem there. I mean, all of these things come at the price of some form of liberty, but then what are we going to do?
Do you think that we should censor certain forms of Islam?
No, I don't think there's anything to censor anything. I think there's a difference between censorship and preventing the teaching of these things in institutions. For example, I wouldn't want Bolshevism taught, proselytized in universities. I wouldn't want jihadism proselytized in mosques, because the people who run these institutions, by being a person at the top of an institution, they come with authority and power and influence, and they can give these things more weight than they deserve. A private citizen just discussing these things on the internet or reading about them for their own curiosity, that's fine. But I do believe there's a difference there.
Right. And you equated the Liberal Democrats to communism. Is that not, as you said earlier, you think it is childish for people to equate UKIP to fascism? Is that not equivalent?
If that could be the last one as well, please.
Sorry. Well, again, I can explain why. It was on Good Morning Britain with Lawrence Webb, where the Liberal Democrats, I think it was an MP, or maybe an MEP, turned around and said, well, liberalism is about equality. No. Liberalism is about liberty. Communism is about equality. Liberalism uses political equality as a tool to guarantee liberty. If political equality wasn't necessary to guarantee liberty, then why would liberalism care about it? It wouldn't matter. If it wasn't, if political inequality wasn't a barrier to liberty, then it just wouldn't matter. But it does, so we have to have it. But this then, once you're using the word equality, well, that word can have many different definitions. And from the communist side of it, it becomes an ideal, and that's how they've been subverted. The ideal of liberalism is not equality, that's a necessary step. The ideal of communism is equality, and that's why the Liberal Democrat shouldn't have been saying that liberalism is about equality. He's just wrong. And you can roll your eyes all you want, but you know I'm right.
We'll just wrap up shortly. One more question from the floor?
Yeah.
Should Trump build his wall, and in your opinion, why hasn't he done so already?
He's been stonewalled by the other political party who don't want the wall. I think that there are a lot of people on the south border of the United States who really want that wall, because there's been an awful lot of immigration, not all of it illegal, obviously, a lot of it legal, but still, they want it as a symbolic gesture, I think. Because I think most illegal immigration actually isn't just people walking across deserts. It's people getting in through various other means. So how effective a wall will be is up for debate. But I think it is a symbolic statement to say, look, we are a nation of law and order, and if you want to come in, you can, but you have to do so orderly, in an orderly way, in a lawful way, because there is a tremendous problem with gangs. And this causes things like, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and gun trafficking, and huge amounts of actual physical danger to people who live in these areas. And I'm sure you've heard of MS-13, who are unbelievable, frankly, in the things that they do, and they can just travel across this border without very much interference in their actual movements. You can complain and say, well, I don't like the wall or something, but you can't say that a wall is inherently immoral, because it's not. Any nation has a right to defend its own borders and a right to put up a barrier across those borders if it just so chooses. There's nothing immoral about walls, and they do work. We've been using them for thousands of years because they work. I think that the Democrats, going off on a tangent, I guess, but I think the Democrats really missed a trick here, because they could probably have run quite severe concessions from Donald Trump in exchange for the wall, because what was it, 21 billion? Okay, that sounds like a lot of money, but in the context of the United States, that's nothing. They're standing on a point of principle because they are mostly in favour of open borders. They don't want any borders. They don't think there should be any immigration controls. Naturally, the Republican side of this doesn't agree, and 90s Democrats wouldn't agree. But there's been quite a radical strain of ideology that's taken over the Democratic Party, and I guess we can call it the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strain. I'm sure everyone's familiar with. And this is something that is genuinely outside of the experience of the Anglosphere. This is a continental innovation. It's not individualistic, and it doesn't respect the liberty of the people over whom it would control. It demands their equality, and now that's all kinds of tyranny can be done in the name of equality, and have been throughout the 20th century. And so when anyone says equality über alles, we should start getting worried, because those people are going to start doing terrible things.
Okay, that just about sums it up. But in the same vein as question time, we'd like to end with something a little bit more light-hearted. You have accused the media of radicalising people into acts of violence against you and
not just me.
Other candidates in the election, or
well, no, generally, people have to remember that the terrible things that are done by people who want to be heard. Now, we can't always hear all of these people. Like, I'm not particularly interested in hearing from neo-Nazis. But I think that it's not just neo-Nazis who care about a certain issue, for example, mass immigration. But the neo-Nazis are at the very far edge of the people who care about that. And they're the ones who are most close to doing something terrible. Now, if we can do something about the issue of mass immigration, not only would a wide amount of the electorate agree that more should be done to curb that, and I really do think this at this point, but it would also take the pressure, take the wind out of the sails of the online echo chambers that talk about this constantly. it's the lack of action and lack of discourse that they, I think, become radicalized by. And I think we can bring more people back from the brink of doing terrible things if we address the mild concerns of the moderates before anything leads to a much further conclusion. And I think that we can do that in many ways for many different ideologies. And I'm really questioning the logic and the justice of the kind of censorship that we engage in society at large now. I'm struggling to find the authority for us to censor tax-paying citizens, even though we really don't like their beliefs. I'm really struggling to see how we morally justify this, because it seems to me just like open tyranny. And this might mean we have to talk to abominable people at some point. But I think that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the 2011 question time appearance of Nick Griffin is actually the best example of this, because people can accuse UKIP of being all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, they're the only people who actually keep the BNP out of their party. And having been a member of the party for like 9-10 months now, whatever it is, I've come to the conclusion that they're just a traditionalist British liberal party. They're not especially ideological, but the things they want fit squarely within the sort of purview of British liberalism. The BNP, they have openly Nazi roots, and this is an alien phenomenon to Britain, in my opinion.
Well, I'll get to the light-hearted portion of that question.
Sorry, yeah, I know. You have to understand, right? I normally do light-hearted stuff when I'm confronting the press or activists or whatever, where they want to be aggressive, and so I just have fun with them. Very rarely do I actually get to talk to people in a space like this about serious issues that I find weigh on my mind. And so as soon as I start getting into this, it's like, wow, God, there are a lot of problems, and much worse stuff is going to happen before it gets better. I don't want to be a prophet or anything, but it's really bad the way that society is being managed by the sort of politically correct London class, and that bubble is going to have to be popped at some point. We're going to have to talk about some tough stuff, and it would be better to have liberals doing it than radicals, in my opinion.
Well, following the topic of really serious questions.
Yeah, let's go for something fun.
You've been attacked with, I think it was a kipper,
Yes.
and various milkshakes.
Yeah.
So, what is your favourite flavour milkshake?
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
Yes. I would feel like a racist if I said vanilla.
Thank you very much for your
My
time. Thank you very much to everyone watching. Thank you very much to Carl for attending, and to our 6 empty chairs. If you'd like, you can make like a 1-minute ending pitch, which would have been offered to all of the candidates, and then we're done after that. So,
vote UKIP so we can actually start talking about some of the tough issues. It better us than someone else, frankly.
Okay, we're off. Done.
thank you very much.
Well, thank you. They were very good questions.
Well,
You're not going to get in trouble for asking those questions.
I,
We'll probably still
We'll see.
not from your.